I still remember the exact color of the sky the night I almost told him the truth. A bruised orange, like the day itself was embarrassed for me. We had been best friends since we were 9 years old, since scraped knees and shared bicycles, since he was the only person who ever made me feel like being myself wasn't a mistake. But that summer, something shifted. A look lasted half a second too long. A silence stretched somewhere it shouldn't have gone. And I started keeping a secret so big it felt like it was rearranging my bones from the inside. He was supposed to be the one person in the world who would never look at me differently. So why was I so afraid that if he knew the truth, I would lose him forever? What I didn't know yet was that he was hiding something too. Something that would turn our entire friendship inside out. But what happened next changed my life forever. The lake house had belonged to Elias Marsh's grandfather, and it still smelled like cedar and old rain even in the driest part of July. Elias was 24, a marine biology graduate student who had spent the last 2 years memorizing the migratory patterns of humpback whales and none of the patterns of his own heart. And when his childhood best friend Theo Callahan pulled into the gravel driveway in a truck that rattled like a percussion section, Elias felt the particular, familiar ache of being glad and terrified at the same time. They had grown up 3 houses apart in a small town called Ashworth Hollow, where the mountains pressed close enough to the sky that sunsets seemed to happen twice, once in the clouds and once in the reflection off Lake Verrick. Theo was 25 now, a carpenter who built furniture with his hands and rarely finished a sentence when a shrug would do, and for as long as Elias could remember, being near him had felt like the only place in the world where he didn't have to explain himself. That was the problem. Elias had spent the last 3 years constructing an elaborate architecture of denial, one room at a time, and every summer he returned to the lake house, the whole structure trembled a little more. "You gonna help me carry this stuff or just stand there judging my truck?" Theo said, hauling a cooler out of the truck bed with the ease of someone who had spent a decade lifting lumber. "I was admiring how it's held together entirely by rust and hope," Elias said. Theo laughed. That laugh, low and unguarded. The one that had lived rent-free in Elias's memory since they were teenagers skipping stones on the lake and arguing about whether fish could feel loneliness. Elias used to think that laugh belonged to the whole town. Now it felt like it belonged, cruelly, only to him in a way he had no right to claim. They spent the first 2 days doing what they always did. Fixing the dock, restocking the pantry, pretending 8 years apart at different colleges and different cities hadn't changed the shape of who they'd become. But there was a new stillness in Theo that Elias couldn't place. A habit of going quiet mid-laugh, of staring at the lake like it owed him an answer. On the 3rd night, sitting on the end of the dock with their feet in water gone silver under the moon, Theo said, "Can I tell you something and you promise not to make it weird?" Elias's heart performed an old practiced trick, dropping and lifting at once. "When have I ever made anything weird? You cried during the dog food commercial. The one with the golden retriever. That dog deserved better, Theo." Theo huffed a laugh, but it faded fast, and when he spoke again his voice had lost its usual ease. "I think I'm supposed to be engaged by now, or dating someone, or I don't know, wanting something I'm supposed to want." He picked at the frayed hem of his jeans. "Everyone in Ashworth Hollow keeps asking when I'm gonna settle down. Like it's an inevitable stop on a train I already bought a ticket for. And I keep saying soon. But I don't feel anything close to soon. I don't feel anything close to it at all." Elias's mouth went dry. He recognized that particular kind of confusion, because he had been carrying a version of it since he was 17, except his had a name he had never once said out loud to another living person. "Maybe," he said carefully, testing each word like ice on a pond, "the timeline everyone else has isn't actually yours." Theo looked at him then, really looked, in a way that made Elias feel simultaneously exposed and safe, an impossible combination he didn't have a word for. "You always know what to say. I don't actually. I just know you. And I know what it's like to hide something you can't name," Elias thought, the sentence rising in his throat like a held breath, and then, as always, receding. That was the first mystery of the summer. What exactly Theo wasn't saying. It hovered over the following week like the heat itself, present in every unfinished sentence, every glance that lasted a beat too long, every time Theo's hand brushed Elias's while passing a coffee mug and neither of them moved away first. The second mystery arrived on a Thursday, when a stranger appeared at the lake house's gate. A man named Casey Okonkwo-Reyes, mid-30s, sharp-suited even in the mountain heat, holding a manila folder like it was a weapon. He introduced himself as a lawyer representing the estate of Elias's late grandfather, and the news he delivered detonated quietly across the porch. The lake house, the only piece of Ashworth Hollow that had ever felt permanently theirs, was going to be sold at the end of the summer to settle debts Elias hadn't known existed. 90 days. That was all they had left in the place that held every summer of their friendship. Elias felt the ground of his childhood shift beneath him, but it was Theo's reaction that surprised him most. A stricken, private grief that seemed disproportionate even for a man who loved the lake as much as Elias did. "Why does this hit you so hard?" Elias asked that night, when Casey had gone and the porch light hummed against a chorus of cicadas. Theo was quiet for a long time, turning a coffee mug in his hands like it might offer him the right words. "Because this house is where I figured something out about myself," he finally said. "And I don't know if I'm brave enough to figure it out anywhere else." Elias's pulse roared in his ears. Figured out what? But Theo only shook his head, the way he always did when a truth got too close to the surface, and said, "Not yet. I need to say it right when I say it." The days that followed became an unbearable rhythm of almost confessions on the dock. Almost touches during storms that knocked the power out and left them lit only by a single dying flashlight. Almost admissions during long silences on drives into town for lumber and eggs. Elias found himself cataloging every one of these near misses with the obsessive precision of a scientist, because that was the only language he trusted with feelings this large, data, pattern, evidence. Anything but the terrifying vocabulary of hope. The twist came on the last Saturday of July, during the town's annual Lantern Festival, when paper lanterns rose off the lake shore like a slow-motion galaxy and half of Ashworth Hollow gathered to watch. Elias was searching for Theo in the crowd when he found him instead in conversation with an older man Elias didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, with Theo's exact jawline. "That's my father," Theo said quietly when Elias approached, an unfamiliar tightness in his voice. "He drove 4 hours because he heard I might be selling my half of the workshop. He thinks I'm running from something." "Are you?" Theo's eyes, catching the lantern light, looked almost frightened. "I came out to him last spring," he said, so quietly it nearly disappeared into the noise of the crowd. "I told him I like men. I told him that's why nothing with women ever fit right, why I always found reasons to leave before it got serious." He didn't yell. He just went quiet, the kind of quiet that's worse than yelling, because it means someone's rebuilding you into a stranger in their head. Theo exhaled like it cost him something physical. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you since April. I kept almost doing it. And every time I got close, I got scared you'd start being careful around me. Start treating me like I was fragile or different or—" "Theo." Elias's voice cracked around the name. "I would never. I know that now," Theo said, and the way he said it, steady, certain, aimed directly at Elias like an arrow finally released, made the entire lantern-lit shoreline tilt sideways in Elias's vision. "Because these last few weeks, watching you not flinch, not pull away, not treat this house like it's just nostalgia. I think some part of me has been trying to tell if it was safe to fall for you before I let myself actually fall." The world went very still. Somewhere behind them a lantern caught fire too close to its wick and someone laughed, and the ordinary sounds of the festival kept moving, indifferent to the way Elias's entire architecture of hiding was collapsing in real time. "You can't say that," Elias whispered, "and then just stand there." "Why not?" "Because I've loved you since I was 17 and I built my whole life around never telling you. And if this is a mistake, Theo, I don't know how I survive it." Theo's hand found his, warm and sure amid the noise and the paper light. "Then let's not make it a mistake," he said. They didn't kiss that night, not yet. Both of them understood, wordlessly, that something this large deserved to be built carefully, not rushed into out of fear of losing the moment. Instead they walked the shoreline until the lanterns thinned to embers, trading 17 years of almosts, of moments neither had known the other had noticed. The time Elias had stayed up all night after Theo's first heartbreak with a girl neither of them had actually wanted him to be with. The time Theo had driven 6 hours to sit outside Elias's dorm the week his parents' marriage ended, saying nothing, just being present, because some griefs only need company, not conversation. But the climax of that summer wasn't the confession. It was what came after. 2 weeks later, Casey Okonkwo returned with the final paperwork on the lake house, and with it, an unexpected offer. Elias's grandfather's estate would forgive the debt entirely if the house passed to a buyer willing to preserve it rather than develop the land. But the offer required a co-signer with stable local ties, someone the town trusted, someone with roots. Theo's name came up almost immediately, suggested by the very father who had gone quiet at the news of his son's truth. It would mean Theo committing his savings, his workshop, his future, to a house that wasn't legally his, for a relationship 2 weeks old, built on feelings 2 decades deep. "You don't have to do this," Elias said, watching Theo read the papers on the porch where they'd once traded almost confessions. "I won't let you gamble your whole life on us just because the timing lined up." Theo set the papers down and looked at him with a steadiness Elias had never seen him wear before. "I spent my whole life terrified of wanting the wrong thing," he said. "The wrong job, the wrong person, the wrong life. But this isn't a gamble, Elias. This is the first time in my life I actually know what I want." He took Elias's hand, calloused and certain. "I'm not signing this because of the house. I'm signing it because I'm not scared of my own life anymore. And that's because of you." Elias's father, no, his own hesitations, the last remaining walls of his architecture, finally gave way completely. "Then let's build something," he said, "that's actually ours." The papers were signed by September. The lake house stayed standing, cedar and old rain and all, and by the time the first frost silvered the dock, Theo had moved his workshop into the old boathouse, filling it with the smell of sawdust and cut pine, and Elias had accepted a research position at the university 40 minutes away, close enough to come home every night to a porch light that no longer hummed alone. On the last warm evening before the first snow, they sat where they always had, feet in water gone cool with autumn, and Theo said, "You know what's strange? I spent years thinking love had to look a certain way to count. Had to fit some template everyone in town had already drawn for me. And now?" Theo turned to him, unguarded in a way that made Elias's chest ache with something that finally, felt like relief instead of fear. "Now I think love just looks like the person who stayed. Even when neither of us knew how to say it yet." Elias leaned his head against Theo's shoulder, watching the last lanterns of the season's memory flicker somewhere behind his eyes, and understood, at last, that the secret he'd carried for 8 years hadn't cost him the friendship he was so afraid to lose. It had built, slowly and quietly, into the truest kind of love, the kind that doesn't announce itself with fireworks, but with someone choosing, again and again, to stay up by January. The lake house wore snow like something it had always been waiting for. Elias Marsh had grown used to the particular hush that settled over Ashworth Hollow in winter. The way sound seemed to travel differently across a frozen Lake Verrick, softer, more careful, as if the whole valley was holding its breath. He liked to think their love had settled into that same hush. Steady, unhurried, no longer something either of them had to fight to name. Theo's workshop in the old boathouse had become the warmest room on the property, with stove ticking, sawdust drifting gold in the lamplight, and most evenings Elias found him there long after dark, sanding some piece of furniture with the patient attention he'd once reserved only for avoiding his own feelings. It was, Elias often thought, one of the strange gifts of loving Theo, watching a man who had spent years running from himself finally sit still. So when the knock came on a Tuesday evening in late January, hard and unfamiliar against the porch door, Elias felt Theo go rigid beside him before either of them had even opened it. The man on the porch was maybe 30, wind-chapped and lean, wearing a coat too thin for the mountain cold. He had Theo's same steady brown eyes, though harder, like something in him had been left out in weather far longer than his jacket could handle. "Sawyer," Theo said, and the single word carried enough history to make Elias's stomach drop. "Didn't think you'd still be here," the man said. "Small towns. Guess some things don't change." "You shouldn't have come," Theo said quietly. "Wouldn't have if I had a choice." Sawyer's gaze flicked to Elias, assessing, unreadable. "I need somewhere to stay. Just a few nights." That was the first mystery of that winter. Who Sawyer Pruitt actually was to Theo, and why his name had never once come up in 8 years of friendship and half a year of love. Theo let him stay in the old caretaker's cabin at the edge of the property, and for 3 days offered Elias nothing but silence where an explanation should have been. Elias recognized the shape of that silence. He'd worn it himself for years, and it terrified him more than any confrontation could have, because it meant Theo was protecting something, and Elias no longer knew if that something included him. "You don't owe me every piece of your past," Elias said on the 4th night, when the wood stove had burned low and Theo sat staring at his hands instead of the fire. "But you owe me knowing if I should be worried." Theo was quiet for a long moment. "Sawyer's my half-brother," he finally said. "Same father, different mother. Nobody in town knows because my dad kept it that way, paid for silence mostly and distance. Sawyer grew up 2 counties over, angry about it his whole life and rightly so. He rubbed his palms against his jeans like he was trying to scrub something off them. Last I heard from him was 4 years ago. He told me he never wanted to see my family again. So him showing up now, needing something, it means something's wrong. Sawyer never asks for help unless there's nothing left to lose." "Then let's find out what it is," Elias said. Together. It took 2 more days for the second mystery to surface, and when it did, it detonated quietly across the kitchen table one gray morning. Sawyer had lost his job at a lumber mill after an injury, lost the apartment that came with it, and worse, in the particular economy of pride that ran through both brothers, lost the last of his savings covering his own father's unpaid medical bills, a father who had disowned him twice and still somehow inherited his loyalty. "Our father's sick," Sawyer said flatly, staring at his coffee rather than either of them. "Lung thing. Won't get better. And I'm the only one dumb enough to still be paying for it." Theo's hands went white-knuckled around his mug. "He kicked you out at 16. Doesn't mean I get to just let him die uncared for." Sawyer's voice cracked on the last word, the first crack in an otherwise carefully built wall. "I know you hate him. You've got every right to. But I needed somewhere that wasn't a shelter, just till I get back on my feet. And this was the only place I could think of where nobody would ask questions." The twist arrived not as a single dramatic revelation but as a slow, uncomfortable understanding. Sawyer wasn't asking Theo to forgive their father. He was asking Theo to help him carry a burden neither of them had ever chosen, simply because blood made it impossible to set down completely. And underneath the discomfort of it, Elias began to see something else. Sawyer's sharp edges weren't cruelty, they were armor, the same kind Theo had once worn before he let himself be known. The climax came on a night when the temperature dropped hard enough to crack a pipe in the caretaker's cabin, and Theo found Sawyer outside at 2 a.m., sitting on the frozen dock in a coat that wasn't warm enough, staring at the black water like it held an answer. "You should be inside," Theo said, sitting down beside him without being asked, the cold biting through both of their jeans. "Didn't want to owe you for that too. You don't owe me for existing, Sawyer." Sawyer laughed, short and humorless. "That's rich, coming from the brother our father actually kept." "He didn't keep me because he wanted me," Theo said, quiet and unflinching in a way Elias, watching from the porch, had only ever seen him be with Elias himself. "He kept me because I was convenient to control. You got out. I just took longer to figure out I needed to." He exhaled, breath fogging in the freezing air. "I spent this whole year finally learning how to stop being ashamed of who I am. I'm not about to let shame about our family keep me from doing right by the one person who actually shares my blood and never got a fair shot. Even after everything, especially after everything." Theo looked at him, steady. "You're my brother. Not because he decided it. Because I'm deciding it right now whether you let me or not." Sawyer didn't answer in words. He simply nodded, the kind of nod that costs a person everything they have left to give, and let Theo help him up off the frozen dock.